and welcome back again to Animal Farm. Today's part is part 11. Today we're continuing with the building of the windmill. As you all remember, um, Napoleon and his propaganda ministry, which is basically just a squealer, have convinced us that not only are we going to build the windmill after all, no. It actually was Napoleon's idea all along, and he only pretended to be against it to get rid of Snowball because Snowball was a criminal. Oh, wait, like a criminal, without any explanation. And then, of course, Snowball was, cast out at the very least. In fact, the dogs, on behalf of Napoleon, tried to murder Snowball, and Snowball had to escape. But so, we are past this now already, and it said here actually the animals were still happy enough. And this continues here also, and that's why I wrote down some themes again, just like last time. One of them is actually relativism. Relativism is that maybe the truth is not always exactly the same, right? The truth maybe depends on personal circumstances. So, and I can already tell you this, they say to themselves, well, we are actually better off now than we used to be, even though we don't actually get more food and we're still working really hard, possibly harder, but hey, we are working for ourselves, so that's nice. So even though the work is the same and the food is the same, we are happier for that. And yeah, this also is being driven by some of the propaganda, right? The anti-human propaganda, for example, how lazy they were, and other things too. Yeah, that's one of these themes. Also, they're still and again and even more relying on Boxer very heavily to do all the work because due to poor planning, they have to do some of the work with simply just brute force. So, right, they'll just have to force their way through it because the planning was so bad. And brute force requires, well, force. And force is what Boxer does best, right? He's the only one, well, he's the hardest worker and he's the strongest one. So a brute force response requires somebody who has great force. And the last theme is foreseeable economic shortcomings. Foreseeable in that, they could see that already in the past. Not all of them, right? Now they're running out of nails and string and fertilizer. Okay, fine. You couldn't easily foresee that, that nails would run out because maybe usually you have a big fat sack of nails and it only runs out occasionally, and then you just buy more since they are cheap. Also, if you are any qualified as a blacksmith, you can make nails. It'll be heavy, thick, large nails, but you can make your own nails too. In fact, it might be the very first project you work on as a blacksmith's apprentice or trainee. Make a nail. If you have practiced this, you can make one by one heavy, thick nails by yourself, and then you have as many nails as you want. Yeah, okay. But so what I meant here was they also could see some of the shortcomings already, like dog biscuits. They need, dogs eat meat, and so right now they always eat biscuits, but the biscuits, they are not making them on the farm, so where do they come from? They have to be bought somehow, right? Or they can't come from anywhere otherwise. Also about the food situation, if, we'll get to that, about the fields, right? And remember, right, food was Napoleon's strong strong selling point, right? Napoleon would always dish out food and would talk about food security and would promise that more food would be available. So if food were to become low, that would also be a serious problem for Napoleon. Anyway, the first part isn't very long and there isn't all that much vocabulary, so I'll read it to you right away. And also the last part from last week that we already did. Oh, and that is now chapter 6. We're here in the beginning of chapter 6. All that year, the animals worked like slaves, but they were happy in their work. They grudged no effort or sacrifice, well aware that everything that they did was for the benefit of themselves and those of their kind who would come after them, and not for a pack of idle, thieving human beings. Throughout the spring and summer, they worked a 60-hour week, and in August, Napoleon announced that there would be work on Sunday afternoons as well. This work was strictly voluntary, but any animal who absented himself from it would have his rations reduced by half. Even so, it was found necessary to leave certain tasks undone. The harvest was a little less successful than in the previous year, and 2 fields, which should have been sown with roots in the early summer, were not sown because the plowing had not been completed early enough. It was possible to foresee that the coming winter would be a hard one. Stop here. Okay. So yeah, some of these themes already, right? 2 of the fields that should have been sown. So sow is to spread seeds, right? I don't know. The gesture is, yeah, you have a bag of seeds and you just throw them, right? But you can also sow them more precisely in that you take one seed or a few, right? And you put them in a little hole in the ground and then you cover the hole. That would be maybe more efficient, because if you just throw them, well, the birds are already waiting and they'll just follow you and pick up all the seeds, right? Pick up all the seeds. Right, but so it doesn't matter because the plowing wasn't done in time, and so they weren't sown at all. And so it is foreseeable that the next winter will be harder. How? Well, there will be less food. Oh, that sucks. Um, this part has a bit of vocabulary that you don't usually see in this use. Well, sowed, sown. Okay, that's fine. Spread seeds. However, sow, the verb, is not the same as sow, the noun. Sow, the pronunciation is different. So this is here more of an A sound, right? That is a female pig. And that is not the same, as you see, not the same as sow. In addition, sow with an O sounds like, it's also not the same, but sounds like sow with an E with a needle. You know, sewing, put lines on clothing, right, with a needle and thread. That is also pronounced so, but this has an E, so that's confusing, and that's why I'm telling you. Okay, Napoleon announced there will now be work on Sunday afternoon. But no, don't worry, he says, it's voluntary work. However, everyone who absented themselves would have their rations, their food, cut in half. Wow. Cut in half, that's that's quite a big punishment. So that's the propaganda again, right? Oh, don't worry, it's voluntary, but if you were to refuse, you would get punished. Oh, what a coincidence. Well, no, meaning it's not voluntary, right? What the hell? That's purely propaganda to call something voluntary that you force people to do. So in addition to that, um, absent is usually adjective. Absent. That's why I have a hard time pronouncing it correctly. Um, absent. Absent has the stress here. Well, the adjective has the stress here. Absent. But we're not using it as an adjective. We're using it as a verb, and that would be absent now. Absent, meaning stay away from, right? Not join. Yeah, stay away from, right? Absent, and then the stress would be here on the e. A little nicer. There. Okay, and so that's not normally verb. And likewise, to grudge is here used as a verb, meaning do something unwillingly, right? Show how much you dislike doing it, right? Or yeah, okay. Do something unwillingly, but most of the time nowadays we see grudge as a noun, as in a phrase, hold a grudge. That is, be angry about something that happened in the past, right? And then you hold on to that anger, and then after years you're still angry that this one person did this to you, right? And you're like, that guy, I 20 years ago, he slept with my girlfriend. Oh, if I ever get chance for revenge, then I'll take it. Well, you could have let it go. It's long time ago. But okay, right. So we'll move on. Yeah, we don't have time. You see, we have other parts to go through. And yeah, we need to talk about the building of the windmill. Yeah, and some of the logistics, how this can be done. Hold on. So we continue. The windmill presented unexpected difficulties. There was a good quarry of limestone on the farm, and plenty of sand and cement had been found in one of the outhouses, so that all the materials for building were at hand. But the problem the animals could not at first solve was how to break up the stone into pieces of suitable size. There seemed no way of doing this except with picks and crowbars, which no animal could use because no animal could stand on his hind legs. Only after weeks of vain effort did the right idea occur to somebody, namely to utilize the force of gravity. Stop here. Okay. So you see, the themes are still here. Let's see how long we can keep those around. So about the windmill, it says it presented also some problems. Well, first of all, not a problem. There is a quarry. A quarry is well, it's a place where you get stone from. So it's basically maybe just the side of a hill and suitable big stone chunks, right, come out of the hillside, and you notice, yes, they are properly big, so that's good. If I only could cut them to proper size, I could probably use them. And not only that, it's limestone. What's good about limestone? Do people like it because it's crazy hard? No, the opposite. Crazy hard stone is not easy to use. No, humans like limestone because it's fairly soft for a stone. It's limestone is mostly calcium. It starts out whitish cream color, and then over the years, especially with acid rain, it turns to a darker color. And in fact, over the years, with too much rain and yeah, acid and pigeons pooping on it, limestone dissolves, the calcium dissolves. Um, so it's not a perfect building material, but on the other hand, it's soft enough that you can cut it really well, and it's nice and uniform, right? So it's all the same throughout. So you can make nice bricks out of it, nice stone pieces, right? And they won't crumble. So that's limestone. And in fact, you also will put some of this calcium later with your cement. So this continues. So okay, there's a quarry. It's of limestone. Limestone is great for building, so that's good. Also, they found cement and sand in an outhouse. Now you say, oh, I know that. An outhouse in American English, that's an outdoor toilet. So right, it's one of those tiny little houses, maybe with a heart-shaped door. Yeah, a little bit of a heart door here, and I don't know, a door handle, and so you say, oh, haha, it's a toilet. No, that's not what they mean. So right there, uh, in British English, outhouse is just a, well, what it says, right? A house, like a smaller shed somewhere outside. So what they only mean here is shed, storage room, right? So okay, that makes sense because yeah, okay. They found cement and sand somewhere in a storage house. Great, because you need cement and the proper type of sand to make mortar, because you wanted to do bricklaying, right? As we have learned in another part. Snowball studied a book that says every man his own bricklayer, so meaning everyone can be a bricklayer. And so for bricklaying, well, you need some kind of stones, such as bricks, right? But it doesn't have to be, it could be any stone. And then you need mortar to go in between, right? Like there's a tool for it, apply it, and then put the bricks on top, right? And push them down, nice and tidy, right? Make sure they are mostly straight, and then you can build walls that way. And so yeah, mortar, it needs to have cement, sand, water, and that's basically it. You need to add some more lime, but I think you'll just buy that mixed in with the cement already. And then you can make mortar, which you need for your bricklaying. Okay, so those things are great. They have all that, but what they didn't know and what they couldn't figure out is how to break the limestone into usable pieces. Because humans would use a pick, so right, a pickaxe. Okay, yeah, okay. Maybe with a blunt end and then also a pointy end. Oh. Yeah, okay, good enough. And a handle. Yes, that'd be a pickaxe with which you hammer holes into the stone, right? You really just need to make a nice hole, then, or a few holes, right? Make a line of holes, because then you can use a crowbar, jam that in, and try to break it past, and then it'll crack along the holes you made, hopefully. And then you can have, well, any size that you want. But the animals can't do that because those tools definitely need you to stand on your hind legs and use your, well, arms to do that. The animals can't do that. So for weeks they tried in vain, meaning it was wasted time and wasted effort. They tried in vain to break the stone into pieces until somebody had the right idea, or at least an idea, and that is to utilize gravity. I didn't write it down, mostly because it didn't fit anywhere. utilize, and in American English that would be utilize with a Z, utilize gravity. What does that mean? Well, we'll learn it just now. They will push the rocks off the side of the cliff. We'll learn it right now. So that's another one of our themes, right? It's really poor planning that they notice there's a good quarry, the right kind of stone. Great, great, great. Let's get to it then. But how can you break the stone? Oh, and then they tried for weeks and couldn't figure it out. So that is a big waste of time, a big waste of energy. So it's definitely going to be poor planning. And their response is, as I said, brute force, in that, yeah, now they just have to pull the heavy big stones up the hill and push them off. We'll get to it. Hold on. Now this will be explained to us about breaking the stones. However, I can already suggest that, yeah, the poor planning maybe wouldn't have happened if Snowball had still been there. Because, right, Snowball was so very educated. Snowball had read the book about bricklaying, and Snowball had all the plans for the windmill worked out. You would maybe suspect that he also had some plans for getting the stone to get the building started, right? But Snowball isn't here, so we'll never know. And so instead, they were trying for many weeks fruitlessly to break the stone, but they couldn't, until finally somebody had not a good idea, but an idea, and that was, namely, to utilize the force of gravity. Huge boulders, far too big to be used as they were lying all over the bed of the quarry. The animals lashed ropes round these, and then all together, cows, horses, sheep, any animal that could lay hold of the rope, even the pigs sometimes joined in at critical moments. They dragged them with desperate slowness up the slope to the top of the quarry, where they were toppled over the edge to shatter to pieces below. Transporting the stone when it was once broken was comparatively easy. Oh, simple. The horses carried it off in cartloads. The sheep dragged single blocks. Even Muriel and Benjamin yoked themselves into an old governess cart and did their share. By late summer, a sufficient store of stone had accumulated, and then the building began under the superintendence of the pigs. But it was a slow, laborious process. So this was a longer part with quite some description. But okay, so it's fairly easy to explain, right? They cannot break the stone. However, there are these big boulders. A boulder is a large stone, maybe larger than a person. These big boulders are lying all around on the bed, just like a riverbed. It's the bottom, right? The bed of the quarry, well, it's the ground level of the quarry. These boulders are maybe, they broke off naturally and just rolled down the hill one day after an earthquake or whatever, right? So these big boulders are far too big to use, but they are not connected to the hillside, so that's good. So they put ropes around them and drag them up a slope. Slope being, I think we've looked at that before, right? Yeah, it's just a route going up, right? They have to pull these huge boulders up the slopes, and everybody has to help. The cows, the horses, the goats, the donkey, everybody who can grab the rope. Even the pigs sometimes help. How nice. They drag them up the slope to the top of the quarry, all right, to the top of the quarry, and then topple topple, well, let's make something fall over, right? So yeah, maybe something that's kind of heavy on the top, and then topple it over, make it fall over. And so it falls for a short time, and is supposed to break into pieces once it hits the ground. Yeah, sounds good. But I also wrote down here, well, gravity is not free. The energy that breaks apart these boulders, you have to put it in first, right? And that is the pulling it up to a high place. You're putting all the energy into the rock. It's now resting energy, right? And then once it gets loose up here, well, then gravity pulls it down and might break it apart when it hits the ground. So it is certainly not a very clever idea. It is a brute force idea, right? Okay, every single boulder that we see lying there, drag it up to the top of the hill, push it over, hope it will break. Sometimes it doesn't. It's also mentioned here a little bit later. Sometimes it doesn't. It's what does it say here? It's slow and laborious. It often takes them whole days just to get one boulder up the slope, and that's that. Meanwhile, transporting away the stone is fairly simple. Um, the horses can do carts, fair enough. The sheep can drag single pieces of stone by themselves, and even Muriel the goat and Benjamin the donkey, they are pulling a governess cart. Governess cart. Uh, Governess is something like a nanny. So maybe for a richer family, they hire an educator, right? Maybe a French woman, right? To be their children's, well, yeah, nanny, but also teacher. And so as a governess, you might be given a little cart that's just for carting children around. So right, I don't know, put some wheels on it, maybe a handle to pull it, and then you can put one or two kids into it, and then pull them to the park, right, or in the garden. That's a governess cart, because governess is a nanny. Well, this is very small, but it's big enough for the goat and the donkey to pull. Yeah. And all of that happens under the superintendence of the pigs. Superintendence is again not a word you see so much, but superintendent as a person, yeah, it's very similar to supervisor, but maybe superintendent is more of a government job, and supervisor is more of a private business job. But in theory, they're the exact same thing. So the pigs, they do help sometimes, dragging the rocks up the slope, the boulders, but most of the time they're only doing supervising, superintendence, that is. Okay, moving on, hurry. So I wrote down slow and laborious. So as in tedious, right? Lots of work for very little result. It probably is meant to remind us of the Soviet Russian work programs. Some of them were pretty foolish, like building railroads to Siberia, because in theory Siberia is very rich with natural resources. Too bad there aren't any people there who could help, well, get them. Also, the nature is just very unforgiving, right? It's always cold, and well, it's just also far away, but it's mostly the cold. So building railroads to Siberia was one of those work projects that were slow and laborious and foolish. And right, yeah, brute force again, right? They'll said, well, we'll do it anyway because we're strong. And this next part suggests this kind of thing. I'm going to read it. But it was a slow, laborious process. Frequently, it took a whole day of exhausting effort to drag a single boulder to the top of the quarry. and sometimes, when it was pushed over the edge, it failed to break. Nothing could have been achieved without Boxer, whose strength seemed equal to that of all the rest of the animals put together. When the boulder began to slip and the animals cried out in despair at finding themselves dragged down the hill, it was always Boxer who strained himself against the rope and brought the boulder to a stop. To see him toiling up the slope inch by inch, his breath coming fast, the tips of his hoofs clawing at the ground, and his great sides matted with sweat, filled everyone with admiration. Clover warned him sometimes to be careful not to overstrain himself, but Boxer would never listen to her. His two slogans, "I will work harder" and "Napoleon is always right," seemed to him a sufficient answer to all problems. He had made arrangements with the cockerel to call him 3/4 of an hour earlier in the mornings instead of half an hour, and in his spare moments, of which there were not many nowadays, he would go alone to the quarry, collect a load of broken stone, and drag it down to the side of the windmill unassisted. Right, very good. So this is all about relying on Boxer, and in fact probably over relying on Boxer, because it's such hard work, right? And Boxer has to strain himself against the rope to 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 save the other animals, right? Because the boulder pulls them all down the slope, right? And they cry out in despair. Despair is hopelessness, right? That they could never do it. And so he has to strain himself harder and harder to get, the boulder to stop, and eventually inch, 1 inch, right? Inch his way forward and up to get the boulder to the top. And Clover warns him once not to overstrain himself, but he says, he has his two mottos. I will work harder, and Napoleon is always right, and he feels that is sufficient answer to any problem. And in fact, he now works more than ever before. He gets up 3/4 of an hour earlier now, earlier than everyone else, because he has an arrangement with the cockerel, so the rooster. Before it was 30 minutes, now it's 3/4 of an hour earlier, so that he sleeps less. And even then, if he still has extra free time, which he doesn't have very often, he would do more volunteer work too. He would go to the quarry, get some more rocks, drag it down to the building site himself. So it's all about relying on Boxer in this part. And in fact, probably over-relying. Moving on, we have more to do. This is now the last part. So we'll still talk about their economic problems, because now it's going to be about all the kind of things that they're missing. And many of them were foreseeable, right? Such as they need parts for the windmill. Snowball said so too. They need dynamos and cables, and Snowball also didn't tell them where they would come from. Now they still need those things and more tools. So a lot of it was foreseeable, right? That's problems with their economic system, and that is now going to be pointed out to us here. But I'm going to read it for you, okay? The other part is relativism again, that they feel they're better off even though they work harder and eat less. Right, what's true might depend on your personal circumstances, right? You might not feel like a prisoner even though you are, right? Yeah. The animals were not badly off throughout that summer. In spite of the hardness of their work, if they had no more food than they had had in Jones's day, at least they did not have less. The advantage of only having to feed themselves and not having to support 5 extravagant human beings as well was so great that it would have taken a lot of failures to outweigh it. And in many ways, the animal method of doing things was more efficient and saved labor. Such jobs as weeding, for instance, could be done with a thoroughness impossible to human beings. And again, since no animal now stole, it was unnecessary to fence off pasture from arable land, which saved a lot of labor on the upkeep of hedges and gates. Nevertheless, as the summer wore on, various unforeseen shortages began to make themselves felt. There was a need of paraffin oil, nails, string, dog biscuits, and iron for the horseshoes, none of which could be produced on the farm. Later, there would also be need for seeds and artificial manures, besides various tools and, finally, the machinery for the windmill. How these were to be procured, no one was able to imagine. Well, actually, you can very much imagine it, but I'll get to that in a second. So, relativism again, right? Um, they don't have more food, but at least it's not exactly less. Well, as long as you work on Sunday afternoon, that is, then you can still have your full rations of food. So that's they don't notice it, right? Also, um, yeah, as I said, they're working really hard, but at least they're working for themselves, so they don't feel it as much of a problem. Okay, and supporting 5 humans, well, that's really Mr. Jones, his 4 men, and Mrs. Jones, that apparently doesn't count. Um, Not having to support these 5 humans, as the text says, outweighs a lot of the problems that they have. So even though they fail at some things, not having to feed humans outweighs the shortages. And in fact, some of the things they do is more efficient, such as weeding. The ducks and the chickens can weed, so pick up all the tiny weeds, very, very, very precisely, and humans could not do that. So that's good. Also, uh, nobody needs to spend time doing fencing. And I wrote fencing here. Well, just to teach you this term, in agriculture, oh my God, fencing is one of the most labor-intensive things you have to do. Fences break all the time. Even if they aren't broken, you have to check them all the time if they're going to break soon. Then, if you don't want to build fences, well, you can also plant hedges with little bushes, right? So that's easier to create in the first place, but then you have to cut them every 2 years or so. Otherwise, they'll grow to the side, right, and take up your arable land. Arable is, well, farmable, right? Usefully farmable land. Farmable. They put arable here in contrast to pasture. So pasture is just grassland that animals are allowed to be on, and arable land is good land that animals are not allowed to be on because that's for crops. But since the animals are now intelligent and nobody steals, they don't need to do that. They don't need to put fences in between. So that's good. However, there are all these shortages, and the book calls them unforeseen. Well, okay, but not all of them are unforeseen. The dog biscuits run out, and they could have seen that coming from a long time away. Okay, but they also need things like nails, uh, and even if they could make nails, they're also running out of iron, so then they couldn't make nails. Iron is especially for the horseshoes, because yeah, horses need horseshoes if you want them to work a lot. The horseshoes grind down and deform and break, then they need to be replaced. And if you don't have iron to make more, well, then that's a problem. They also need paraffin oil. I don't know what they need it for, but apparently, well, paraffin. The only thing you can do with it is burn it for heat and for light. So it's for lighting, maybe. the book doesn't explicitly say that the animals use lanterns and lamps, but that's really the only thing you can do with paraffin. Well, for heat too, right? But it's summer, so that doesn't matter. Um, yeah, the oil runs out, and today maybe we would call that kerosene instead. Um, and other things, string, yeah, okay, no one could have seen that coming. Seeds, you maybe could have seen that coming. Yeah, you want to grow more crops, then you need to produce either your own seeds, but that's quite difficult, getting the seeds out of the crops again to replant them and save them a whole year until the next season, or you need to buy seeds, and you can't. And they also needed artificial manure. Artificial manure would be fertilizer, right? Apparently the animal manure, the animal poop, isn't good enough. They would like artificial manure, but they can't have that either. And in the very end, they need tools for the building, okay, and they need machinery, as we have now said, the dynamo and the cables. And how could they procure them? Nobody could imagine it. Well, in fact, it's very easy to imagine. There's really only one way to get these things. Something that they promised they wouldn't do. It's trade. Big surprise. That's going to come up next. They can produce these things, but they need them, especially the parts for the windmill. Otherwise, they could stop right now. So there's really only one way to get them. It's trade. That's going to come in the next part. They promised, and it's part of old majors' teachings, not to engage in trade, but they'll probably have to. Right, that's where we'll stop today. Probably was long enough already, and I'll read you the whole part again, and then that was that. One more time from the beginning of chapter 6. All that year the animals worked like slaves, but they were happy in their work. They grudged no effort or sacrifice, well aware that everything that they did was for the benefit of themselves and those of their kind who would come after them, and not for a pack of idle, thieving human beings. Blah. Throughout the spring and summer, they worked a 60-hour week, and in August, Napoleon announced that there would be work on Sunday afternoons as well. This work was strictly voluntary, but any animal who absented himself from it would have his rations reduced by half. Even so, it was found necessary to leave certain tasks undone. The harvest was a little less successful than in the previous year, and 2 fields which should have been sown with roots in the early summer were not sown because the plowing had not been completed early enough. It was possible to foresee that the coming winter would be a hard one. The windmill presented unexpected difficulties. There was a good quarry of limestone on the farm, and plenty of sand and cement had been found in one of the outhouses, so that all the materials for building were at hand. But the problem the animals could not at first solve was how to break up the stone into pieces of suitable size. There seemed no way of doing this except with picks and crowbars, which no animal could use, because no animal could stand on his hind legs. Only after weeks of vain effort did the right idea occur to somebody, namely, to utilize the force of gravity. Huge boulders, far too big to be used as they were lying all over the bed of the quarry. The animals lashed ropes round these, and then all together, cows, horses, sheep, any animal that could lay hold of the rope, even the pigs sometimes joined in at critical moments. They dragged them with desperate slowness up the slope to the top of the quarry, where they were toppled over the edge to shatter to pieces below. Transporting the stone when it was once broken was comparatively simple. The horses carried it off in cartloads, the sheep dragged single blocks, even Muriel and Benjamin yoked themselves into an old governess cart and did their share. By late summer, a sufficient store of stone had accumulated, and then the building began under the superintendence of the pigs. But it was a slow, laborious process. Frequently, it took a whole day of exhausting effort to drag a single boulder to the top of the quarry, and sometimes, when it was pushed over the edge, it failed to break. Nothing could have been achieved without Boxer, whose strength seemed equal to that of all the rest of the animals put together. When the boulder began to slip and the animals cried out in despair at finding themselves dragged down the hill, it was always Boxer who strained himself against the rope and brought the boulder to a stop. To see him toiling up the slope inch by inch, his breath coming fast, the tips of his hoofs clawing at the ground, and his great sides matted with sweat, filled everyone with admiration. Clover warned him sometimes to be careful not to overstrain himself, but Boxer would never listen to her. His two slogans, "I will work harder" and "Napoleon is always right," seemed to him a sufficient answer to all problems. He had made arrangements with the cockerel to call him 3/4 of an hour earlier in the mornings instead of half an hour, and in his spare moments, of which there were not many nowadays, he would go alone to the quarry, collect a load of broken stone, and drag it down to the side of the windmill unassisted. The animals were not badly off throughout that summer, in spite of the hardness of their work. If they had no more food than they had had in Jones's day, at least they did not have less. The advantage of only having to feed themselves and not having to support 5 extravagant human beings as well was so great that it would have taken a lot of failures to outweigh it. And in many ways, the animal method of doing things was more efficient and saved labor. Such jobs as weeding, for instance, could be done with a thoroughness impossible to human beings. And again, since no animal now stole, it was unnecessary to fence off pasture from arable land, which saved a lot of labor on the upkeep of hedges and gates. Nevertheless, as the summer wore on, various unforeseen shortages began to make themselves felt. There was need of paraffin oil, nails, string, dog biscuits, and iron for the horses' shoes, none of which could be produced on the farm. Later, there would also be need for seeds and artificial manures, besides various tools, and, finally, the machinery for the windmill. How these were to be procured, no one was able to imagine. That is where we shall stop today, and you know it already, right? It has to be trade. Tools, they cannot make them. Iron, they cannot make it. They can wish for it, but they cannot produce it. So if they want to continue building the windmill, they have to engage in trade. Okay, we'll stop here for this week. I hope you enjoyed that. It is really hot. Goodbye.